When I was young, a lot of things were different. Unfortunately, most of the differences seen now are heartbreaking and are not good at all.
Before now, men were strong protectors of the weak, fathers, brothers, lovers, sons. Their mere presence guaranteed the safety of women and children.
But what do we do now?
Men harassing and raping women.
Men sexually abuse little girls.
Men battering and killing their wives.
Any form of sexual assault, be it rape, sexual abuse, or pedophilia, is a killer to human self-esteem.
Women should stop dying in silence.
Speak now.
The rapist should be stigmatized, not the victim.
I think death sentence should be the consequence of such terrible act.
And you mothers, build confidence in your children, put trust in them, listen to them when they make reports, and take necessary actions.
Talking of mothers before now, women were virtuous.
They were mothers, daughters, and sisters.
Nurturing, counseling, supporting their men folks.
But now, women are trafficking female children for money. Women are forced to be silenced.
All this must stop, and it must stop now.
Real men do not abuse, rape, or molest women and children. It is barbaric, unacceptable. Let all real men stand with us.
Together, let's say an emphatic no to rape, sexual abuse, pedophilia, and domestic violence.
The total population of Sierra Leone in 2019 was stated approximately at 7.8 million. And the most common cancer reported in 2018 was breast cancer, with an incidence rate of 25.1% and a mortality rate of 19.2%. Ward 2 at the Connaught Hospital, Freetown, is a female surgical ward that cares for patients requiring breast surgery, chemotherapy, and palliative care. General surgery also admits to the ward as see fit. The ward is in need of a significant refurbishment and has a major impact on patient assessment and delivery of treatment, dignity, comfort, and infection control measures. The current ward area
which aims to help people find information about death, dying, and grief, and support people to talk more about the issues so that they can start to break down the stigma that tends to surround this topic. Poppies has been a supporter and around for Dying Matters, a campaign that's been actually running for 10 years now. And we're doing a lot of work around making sure that the campaign's updated and fit for purpose, if you like, because we are in totally different times with COVID. If you're interested in joining us, you can sign up at the Dying Matters website. You'll get free information, and you join a community of around 13,000 people who are all part of the Dying Matters community. So this evening, our theme is A Good Place to Die, which is what we're focusing on this year for the Dying Matters Awareness Week theme. And I hope that you'll have seen some of the talk throughout the week about these issues, both nationally and at a community level. As a campaign, we've seen more people register an event this year than they've ever done, which is amazing. But we know it's a hot topic, and I think it's going to be really interesting to hear from the panel, because COVID, I think, has really meant that we've all had to face our mortality in a way that perhaps we haven't as individuals or as a society for a very, very, very long time. On the theme, A Good Place to Die, I just want people to understand Hospice UK isn't advocating for any one place being better than another. And I think that's what's something we'll explore a bit further with our panel, despite the name of our charity. This is all about individuals. It's about choice and preparation. And that's something I'm really looking forward to hearing different perspectives from our speakers this evening. In a moment, I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, but I'm going to give first a few housekeeping points, just so hopefully this makes this a comfortable experience for everybody. The event is being recorded, but will only show the panelists. And the second thing I think to point out is, as you may know, we will be talking about tough issues. And if this conversation raises difficult feelings, please, we will have links available in the chat for bereavement support organisations or places that you can go to. I would encourage you reach out if you need to talk to somebody. If you want to ask questions of the panel as we go through the evening, please put your questions into the chat box and I'll come to them at the end, and we'll have some time to be able to submit those questions. So I'm going to turn to our expert panel and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And we're going to start with Isata. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, why you're here, what you do?
Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us at Poppy's event. It's been a pleasure and it's an honor. So my name is Isata Sise. I'm a joint head of community services at Royal Trinity Hospice, which is one of the oldest London hospices in the UK. And I've been there for a very long time. I've been there for the last 15 years as a community nurse specialist in palliative care. And also within my community, my background is Sierra Leonean by parenthood. And within my community here in UK, I also raise a lot of education and health promotion to ensure people are made aware of what's going on and keeping them informed. And so one of my forte, of course, it's about end of life and educating people and raising awareness. So that's what I do, CEO of the Health Show Partnership Program. Wonderful. So that's me.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn to Nafisa next, please, because you've come on a very interesting, challenging journey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nafisa. I'm the founder of Goodness Gracious Grief. It's a blog and a community that I've set up following the loss of my sister, Simon Thompson, who passed away back in June. So I haven't even hit the year mark. So she got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer at the age of 29, and she became a huge advocate for confronting death, loss and grief head on, to kind of make your situation work for you. And also she was an advocate for cancer in young people and also for BAME communities. So she was, leading with breaking down these taboo topics and conversations, and did just a lot of work for these communities. So obviously I've been going through my own journey myself, and as a means of connecting with others, particularly through the lockdown, as my loss was during we are living through the pandemic, but my loss was at the height of the pandemic. I found myself turning to the online space. So I set up Goodness Gracious Grief as a means of continuing my sister's hard work and also connecting with other young people who are experiencing grief, who may not necessarily know how to speak about it. And I'll be exploring this work further through workshops and supper clubs, commencing from July this year. So it is really exciting, because for me and my family, food is at the centre of everything we do, and we actually run a restaurant in South London, which my sister Sima, who passed away, she founded. And yeah, so looking to use that space initially. And I also have a exhibition in the pipeline with a charity, Let's Talk About Loss, who share similar values with me. But yeah, it's just it's very much a way of expressing my own grief whilst connecting with others. And I guess it's just my way as well of honouring my sister's legacy, because it's the work that she started, and I'm finding it within myself very comforting and cathartic to continue some of this. So
fantastic. Thank you, Nafisa. And last but by no means least, of course, Poppy.
Thank you. I feel so thrilled to be here with you all. So I set up Poppies in 2012, and our mission then and our mission now is to try and make death care more person-centred, more thoughtful, more gentle, and more transparent in a sector that can be very good. You know, there are many good funeral directors out there, but there is no regulation. And I'd say there's no real strong sense of what great looks like. And we're trying to help redefine that, both for our own clients and for the rest of the sector, for the wider population. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Poppy. A huge thank you to you all. I can tell this is going to be a really rich discussion with all the different expertise and the experience that you all bring to this event this evening. Just a final reminder to all of those that you are watching and listening, please put your questions in the chat box as we go, and I will come to them at the end and get through as many as I possibly can. But I'm going to kick off my first question, because I get to ask the first question, is to the whole of the panel, really. There's a really common assumption, isn't there, that people don't want to talk about death and dying. And I just wondered, in your experience, how true is it, and why do you think people avoid talking about it? Maybe I'll go to Nafisa first, if that's okay.
So I've had a mixed experience, I'd say. Obviously, in the first instance of death and loss, they just feel awkward. In British culture, we have the whole stiff upper lip mentality and just to kind of get on with things. So I think when you're trying to confront these topics, if that person has not yet been touched by a loss, then they will absolutely not know how to be. But at the same time, I do think there's a growing interest in exploring these subjects. I would say the lockdown has been the factor that's allowed for the openness and willingness for people to accept these topics. I found that some of the writing I've done for the large national publications has been just met with a lot of positive feedback and gratitude for bringing these topics to the forefront. So I guess in a weird way, I don't know if this is the right language for grief and death, but in a weird way, it's an exciting time for these taboo topics. They're finally breaking through.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Asata, Poppy, what about your experiences?
Well, from my perspective, from a hospice perspective, I think it's quite mixed. As most people know, people who are referred to hospices are those with life-threatening or life-limiting illnesses. And so part of our role is to do advanced care planning, have that discussion about what the future holds. And for some people, like Nafisa quite rightly mentioned, because they've never really experienced a loss, it kind of feels alienated to them to talk about it or to even start thinking about it. And then on the other spectrum, you have people who come, they're already focused, they want to talk about it, they're not in denial, and they just want to deal with it, sort it out, and then move on with their treatment and so on and so forth. Because even though you're referred to hospices, people still will be having treatments. And I think that's where sometimes people get it wrong, or they feel differently about it, because most people think as soon as you're referred to hospice, it means you're dying. And it's not always the case. So it is quite mixed. You have people who are willing to talk about it, and you have those who really don't want to talk about it. And some people don't until end of life, really. And I think that is something we take great pride in respecting, because it's about what people can cope with and what they can deal with and what they can manage in terms of their mental state. If I flip the coin in terms of my BAME community that I support, especially my country of origin, Sierra Leone, talking about death and dying is quite challenging. Traditionally and culturally, it's not something you want to talk about, because there's some myth that you're actually inviting it to happen, you're preempting it. So people tend not to talk about it much. And when they do, it's because it's actually happened, it's reality, and they don't have a choice, and they have to talk about it. However, in the last 18 months with the pandemic, it's actually kind of, death and dying has raised its head, and it's made people think more about it and want to talk about it and actually think about what the future holds. So for me, I think it's quite mixed, and it is getting better, like Nafisa said. It has actually, with COVID, these are some of the positive things that's come out of COVID. People are talking about things they don't necessarily want to talk about before.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, because I remember 10 years ago when I started telling people, you know, what I was planning to do with my life, which was a real diversion from what I was doing before. And I'm thinking of the 10 years that I've been running Poppies. I've never, ever had anyone, I'd say, respond badly to the topic. I think people are often thrown. And I find, I don't know if this is a particularly, you know, this community thing, but people sometimes will crack strange jokes, which I think is a defense mechanism often, you know, of like, I'm thrown and I feel some weird things, and so I'm just going to sort of crack a strange joke. That's sort of the worst that I feel I've been met with. Mostly my experience, at least professionally, is there's a huge sense of relief. And again, I recognize that I'm in a really different situation to Isata, in that when people come to us, it has happened, or it is definitely going to happen. So they are those people, whether that's the person who's dying or whether that's the family and friends organizing the funeral, the fact that we are able to make that conversation feel open and safe and welcome and free of judgment there's probably like a big exhale around that. But I think this is one of those subjects that lurks at the back of absolutely everybody's head, because we all know that it's the one of the two things we all share after being born. And I do think there's a bad time, and I'm really interested in this idea that we are often talking about this when it's pressing, and actually that's just not a great time. We're then afraid, and we're in panic mode, like fight or flight, and that's not a good time to be talking about anything for the first time. So I'm really interested in obviously hugely in line with Dying Matters and with the theme this year of like, if these conversations can be begun in non-threatening circumstances, how does that impact our experience down the line?
Yeah, thank you, Poppy. That sort of really nicely leads on to this question that I've got about, we've talked about some of those barriers, the fact that if you haven't experienced it, you tend not to talk about it, the fact that you can respect the sort of place that people are at that given moment in time. But Poppy, you sort of touched on this. Why and how is it helpful to have these conversations? You know, I just wanted maybe, Isata, have you got any experience of where Poppy refers to those conversations coming just a bit too late? What's your professional experience of all of that?
Again, that's quite mixed, because really depends on that individual and how comfortable they feel about talking about death and dying, and also talking and having that discussion, the discussion about what we call advanced care planning. And like Poppy rightly said, we should be having these conversations sooner. From my personal perspective is, once someone is diagnosed of a life-limiting illness, they should start that conversation, not wait in the long haul where they're now finding it difficult or they're overwhelmed with so many other things. You're then having that conversation. Very important to have that conversation early, because when it's had early, apart from the fact that whatever your wishes are is actually taken into consideration, it also helps you to put your affairs in order. I always say to people, I have this theme that I always use: put your house in order. It gives you the opportunity to do what you want, how you want it, in terms of your funeral, in terms of your will, in terms of if you're a single parent, for example, sorting out legal guardianship and so on and so forth. I have, going back many, many years ago, I had a patient that had been told they had a very short prognosis of about 6 months. And she said to me, every time I visited her at home, she said to me, "Can I ask you one question?" I asked her. She said, "Yes. Would you be able to tell me when I've had few weeks left?" And I said to her, "Well, I really don't have a crystal ball. Scientifically, I could try, but that could just be a guesstimate." And then she kept asking. She was quite repetitive with this question with every visit. And so I said to her one day, "Why do you keep asking me the same question and I keep giving you the same answer?" She said, "Well, I've got quite a lot of personal letters that I want to shred before I die. However, I don't want to do it too soon. I want to do it as late as possible, so that because they mean a lot to me, but at the same time, I don't want anyone else to be privy to it." So that is one of the reasons why these conversations should be had sooner rather than later, because the key thing is it gives people the opportunity to do what they want, plan, and be part of that planning to ensure that their wishes are met. And also for the people that are left behind, it allows them to grieve properly. It allows them to focus on what they should be focused on. I mean, in my community, where some of the experiences we face is when people die, what do they want? Now, we're in an era where there's so many different ways in terms of funeral and burial and cremation and so on and so forth. It's about what that person wants. And where we're having the challenges most is where people think they know what that person wants or wanted. And then it sometimes creates such a chaos within a family, which then actually puts a stop on the grieving process and then has a longer term impact on them. So for me, those are the kind of experiences I've had, which makes it very important for it to be discussed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, thanks, Isata. I can see lots of people in the chat resonating with their conversations that they are having and trying to do that as soon as possible. I'm going to come to you, Nafisa, because your platform reaches out to people in their 20s and 30s who are facing bereavement. And I think that's something that most of us wouldn't even consider, perhaps. How comfortable are people in that age group talking about death and dying? Where do you think there are gaps in supporting this particular cohort?
I guess, so the positive of the reach of the platform is that not everyone has actually experienced a loss. So these topics have now come to the surface, and it's suddenly instigated this understanding that actually life's not guaranteed. And I guess a part of me sharing my story about my sister having been diagnosed with terminal illness at the age of 29 is that life's not guaranteed, and you might not necessarily age gracefully into a late age, a beautiful and late age, and then have that time to sit down and write this will that you thought that would be the plan, but life can stop you in your tracks. And how can we address this? Because it is happening left, right, and centre. The more you look into it, it's just, I guess it's the necessity almost to just appreciate and have gratitude for your life and your health, because ultimately it could be taken away from you at any moment. And I don't mean to sound so dramatic. Bearing in mind, I'm only 24 myself, and I've been confronted now by death and loss and my own grief. And I just think normalizing the discussions around death is only going to have a positive thing, where when a person is then confronted by a loss, they'll be perhaps more capable and well equipped with the right tools to handle it. Or when someone around them experiences a loss, they may know how to respond and what kind of language might be appreciated when someone's grieving. So I think we could bring the learnings around death and loss way sooner. I'd love to find a way to integrate that into education, but that again might be just leaping too far.
No, I don't think so. It's something that Dying Matters we've been looking at for a couple of years now, and working out where could we start introducing those conversations. You know, why are we so afraid to talk to our children about the fact that we all die, and it can be very age appropriate. And there's lots of great work going on out there with people helping children, for example, to understand what death, dying and bereavement mean. And I just wanted to ask you, Nafisa, how did you find those conversations with your sister? Did she lead them, or did your family lead them, or professionals? Are you able to share a bit about how that process worked for you?
So initially, I guess, having been given a terminal diagnosis, my sister had a bit of a period of time where she just really wanted to understand her cancer, what was going on, and accepting the fact that her life was going to be cut short. And we're a tight unit of 4 sisters. So I'm the youngest of the 4 and she's the eldest. There's a gap of 7 years between us. And our coping mechanism was to have hope. And we just knew, alongside the hope, we had to also accept the fact that my sister, she's not guaranteed the next year or 2, however long it may be. So what happened was she would have these chats with us, and when she shared her own story online, considering her age and the fact that, you know, social media is such a powerful tool, it really resonated with a lot of people, and it sent a shockwave. It sent a shockwave, like the network, I don't know how to explain it, just how it got picked up by a lot of people, because suddenly everyone was normalizing a little bit more about the fact that your life's not guaranteed. And so it was really powerful when she started to speak and write about it, and she started to be given a bit more of a platform. And I'd say that age group has resonated and understood and been quite open with the concept of grief. And the positive impact of this has been the discussions that this age group, they're now having with their parents or their grandparents that have been unable to speak about these topics. I'd say it's only going to be passed down the generations the more we normalise the discussions around death and how we approach grief too.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Aisata, in a hospice setting, how do you help prepare patients and their families to be in a good place to die?
Well, being in a good place to die, I know when you say that phrase, it tends to think it's about the environment, the place itself. But actually, it is not. It's fairly holistic. It's about looking at things from different perspectives. It's looking at that individual as a whole. And so within the hospice, we look at not just where the person wants, as in the physical bit of where they want to be, as in whether they want to die in the bed or whether they want to die on their sofa. We also look at their emotional space. What is there that needs to be put aside for them? What is there that they want closure to? We also look at their spiritual being. what is important to them, what is relevant. And so it's not just about that place, because I think that's very important for our viewers to know that it's not just about that place, it's about everything else, physically, emotionally, mentally, where you want to be is very important. And at the hospice, we have a provision for all of that. So it's not just a hospice with specialist palliative care consultants, registrars and nurses and carers. It's also a place where we have a significant amount of spiritual need, spiritual leaders. We have multi-faith. So we have the imams, the priests, the chaplains. We also have our patient and family support team who deal with counseling, not just for the patient, for their carers, their loved ones, including the children as well. So we look at it holistically and ensure that what that it means to that person in terms of what is their interpretation of a good place to die is recognized and is acknowledged, and we ensure it's met.
And you do that on such an individual case-by-case basis, don't you? We know how the hospices work. It's quite extraordinary. There have been lovely stories of somebody who was homeless who came to the hospice in his last few days and didn't want to be in a bed in the hospital.
No, yep.
He wanted to be in a tent in the grounds. And so that was organised for him to have his last days living in a tent in the grounds of the hospice where he died peacefully, but the way he wanted to go. So I know that you work very hard to make sure that people get those choices and that they are listened to.
Absolutely. And I think it's very important for people to understand that we've got people who they just want to be on their sofa. They want their pets around them. That's what's important to them. That's their good place to die. They want, we had a homeless gentleman who's been homeless for over 20 years. He was transferred to the hospice, and all of a sudden we realized every time the nurses went into his room, he was found on the floor. But then he hadn't fallen off the bed. He just wasn't used to sleeping on a bed. And so eventually they did understand why he wanted to be on the floor. And so they pulled the mattress off the bed and put it on the floor. So that's where he wanted to be. That's what was his good place to be.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Poppy, you have a slightly different perspective on the journey in many ways, don't you? Because as a funeral director, do you find that bereaved people come to you knowing what their loved ones wanted for their funerals? Have they had those conversations before they died? Have you seen any changes over the years?
First of all, I just have to say I'm like blown away by this story about this man, and it's just like made my day and just reminded me, not that I forgot, how incredible hospice work is. It's just amazing. Do people know what they want when they come to Poppy's or funeral directors? I think generally no, or generally not. You know, the things that people say when we pick up the phone tend to be, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never done this before. I'm at sea. And I think this is particularly interesting because often we're talking to people who are at a stage in their life where they generally do know what they're doing, which I think is particularly disempowering for people or hard for people that they're, you know, I think the statistics are that people arrange normally 1 or maximum 2 funerals in their life. So basically no one is an expert at it. And of course there are people that come and say, you know, my mum's buried in this plot and my dad's sharing the plot, or, you know, our family always go to Beckenham Crematorium. You know, that there are of course traditions that people tap into, but it is amazing how little people know about what they want. I was chatting to someone in our team today who said something which rang so true for me, which is like the knowledge is in there deep down, like the instinct, the gut instinct is in there about what would be right. But again, I think it comes back to this sense of not having we don't know how to articulate these things. We don't know how to discuss these things. We might have a deep sense of what would be right for us. For example, do we want some kind of big show, or do we want something kind of small and intimate? That we probably do know that deep down. And we work quite hard at Poppies to go slowly with people to kind of tease that stuff out, because I think otherwise you run the risk of, that's why I think the funeral sector has become so sort of much packages on a shelf, because you have grieving people who can't locate themselves, and then you have people running businesses who feel they do know what you should have, and you can sell that package. But we do every now and then have the privilege of speaking to someone who maybe they are dying, or maybe the family and friends do know, and that confidence, that kind of groundedness of knowing what is right for you, and knowing that it is right, whatever that means to you, it is a different experience, I think, when those conversations have somewhat been had. I'm not talking about planning it down to the last detail, but I think the kind of the having a general sense of like, we know what we want.
What is it, do you think, that stops that sort of conversation around, because it's very common, isn't it? People think there is limits on what's possible around death and the end of life and the funerals, and that you have to do things a certain way. Why are we not able to get beyond that, do you think, Poppy? When you've looked over the years, what is it that's stopping us from going, actually, do you know what? Because I've now changed my mind. I'm going to be buried in a wicker coffin thing, because I think that's really fantastic. I didn't even know that existed. What's going on there?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think the first thing, I know we've said it, but I think it's worth saying again, is like, if you've never spoken about this subject, if you haven't grown up in a family or in a community where when you've absorbed the idea that to talk about death and dying is to breach some kind of code, and then when someone is dying, or then when someone has just died, really to make that conversation about what the funeral might be or what might happen after the death open and creative, it's kind of like a firework goes off. You've gone from this kind of very tight, restrained, like, don't talk about it, don't upset the person who's died, don't upset the other people who don't want to, all these assumptions that no one wants to talk about it, or that by talking about it you will, as we've said, like, make it happen faster, or so I think there's something there around, again, if we're not having these discussions at school, if we're not having these discussions in our workplaces, then we're contributing to this world where we don't have the language, we don't have the openness, we don't have the creativity. But then I think separately there's a sense of we're just, mostly what we're shown in terms of funerals is quite formulaic.
Yeah.
Whether that be like on TV, or whether that literally be the funerals we go to, they are generally like black hearse, black limousine, 20 minutes at the crematorium. Again, it's changing now, but like someone stands at the front, may not know the person who's died, says the things, and I think one of the things that I feel like I've seen change a lot over the last 10 years is some of the recognition of like, hang on a minute, who is this experience for? Are we like ticking some boxes? Are we going through some kind of like legal bureaucratic process to get to the other side? Or is this experience meant to be serving us in some way? And that's obviously very much the conversations we're trying to blow open at Poppies with our clients. It's not to throw people. I think we face some of the challenges that I know ISATA will face and hospices will face, which is like, when the time pressure is quite tight and when people's minds are quite closed, you don't want to overwhelm them. You don't want to throw them. And for some people, the familiar is reassuring. So it's not to say at Poppies we don't take a grieving person and say like, well, did you know? It's not that. Yeah. But we do see it as our job to hold people's hands and open their slightly, like create cracks of light in, and to tease out what matters to them. So for one family, it might not be about the funeral at all. The funeral itself, might not be the priority of the family. The priority of the family might be, my dad died at home and we want to keep him at home. And that's our big challenge. That's the thing that we care about most. And so then we get to focus in on that a bit and think, okay, how can we support you with that? Because there are all these assumptions about what's legal and what's possible. And we happen to live in a country where basically everything's legal. Like it's, I won't list all the things, but it's totally legal to be buried in your back garden. It's totally legal and fine to stay at home between the death and the funeral. You don't have to hire a funeral director. There's so much that people don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you. Nafisa, I want to come to you about this idea of knowledge being powerful and enabling people. When you learned about your sister's diagnosis, what information did you have about end of life care and the discussions and the decisions that you had to make? What was missing? What would have helped you, do you think? Or is it still too soon for you to process some of that?
I think, so first of all, I must share my gratitude for the hospice that my sister was connected with, because of obviously palliative care, the support, the treatment, but also the spiritual side, as Isata touched upon earlier. That was just so phenomenal and brilliant in terms of processing life and the fact that life was going to come to an end. For us as a family, it was brilliant. I think if I had to reflect now, the missing component, it did actually come down to what happened right at the end. I think I was that person that rang up a funeral directors and I was like, hi, I'm 23. I have no idea what I'm doing. I need to arrange a funeral for my sister. But it was so strange and absurd to go through that process. One thing my sister did say was that she wanted to be buried, but then she said, but the rest of it, you girls can just figure out, you guys can just do it. And I remember just looking at all these materials and bits from the directors I did go with. And I almost, I kind of wish I went for Poppy by the sounds of it, because I would have loved for you to have ignited that spark a bit more. I knew I wanted to paint her coffin bright yellow, but I didn't know about all the kind of what rules were laws and vice versa. I didn't know any of that. So I was just trying my best to have a young, fun and creative funeral to express that my sister was young, but actually following, like you said, some sort of trajectory that was laid out for me by this director. So I think, there's a gap of, there's missing information there, and that could be brought out a bit more, because again, as Poppy mentioned, just most people don't really have to organise a funeral. It is a unknown territory.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm thinking about that, your sister sadly died during the COVID epidemic. And, we've seen thousands of people die during this period of time in a way that we couldn't have been prepared for, I don't think. Isata, when you've kind of confronting death and dying, and you're kind of this is almost your day job, you're a palliative care expert. What impact do you think that these deaths during the COVID pandemic are going to have on people's experiences of grief?
Again, it's quite individualized. However, I think for the majority of people, I'm quite concerned about their mental health in the long run, because like we've all said and mentioned, death and dying or organizing funerals and being bereaved is not something it's not a regular thing for most people. And for a lot of people, because of the rules that were in place, the guidelines, a lot of people did not do funerals the way they're used to doing funerals, in terms of traditions, in terms of cultures, in terms of saying their goodbyes, in terms of having those closures, in terms of helping them in their grieving process. So I think the impact is going to be quite huge, significantly, in terms of grief and how quickly people are able to cope and manage and move on, respectively. So I think for me, that's one of my greatest concerns, because I personally, within my community, because of the pandemic, I had to step up because of my palliative care experience. I had to step up within my community to help organize funerals, because people were just so overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. They don't, everything changed from registering a death to how you contact a funeral director, everything changed. So all of a sudden, people then needed to register death electronically, whilst, you know, usually they go to the town hall and register it, get their certificate, and move on. So we are going to see a noticeably huge impact on a lot of people, especially people's mental health.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And Poppy, what about you during this very stressful, difficult time? Because you've faced some real challenging moments. I've thought a lot about the funeral directors. They haven't been in quite as front and center as all the kind of key workers, and yet you've faced extraordinary challenges, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a pretty full-on year. I think that, you know, like very much like would have been true for ISATA, you know, that combination of like overwhelming need with alongside sort of PPE shortage was particularly kind of stressful and horrific time. But yeah, a few reflections. The first one is I agree with ISATA that, you know, and I imagine for Nafisa hugely, you know, grieving in isolation, you know, we are mammals and we are meant to be amongst others, and sometimes those others don't say the right thing, you know, but we're not meant to be alone through these processes. So I think the mental health challenge is going to be massive. And there were some other things that we saw that were interesting and not all bad. So horrific that lots and lots of people were not able to go to the funerals of people that they loved. And for the people who were there, we have heard from certain families that the kind of intimacy that they got was wonderful. You know, in some circumstances that the restrictions gave some families or groups of friends permission not to put on a show, permission to kind of be themselves and meet their own needs, which is, it's not to say hooray, because there's a huge cost to that, but really interesting to understand more. And then some really interesting things like things that we mostly know, like, you know, for many people, they did not get to say goodbye to the person who was dying because that person was dying in a hospital and visits were restricted. So I'm thinking of a family who, you know, said goodbye to their dad because he was taking an ambulance from the house, but they weren't expecting him to die. Mm-hmm. And he died a few days later and they weren't able to be with him. And then the hospital couldn't facilitate the family coming and seeing him after he died. And then the vast majority of funeral directors were not facilitating visits to people who died because of infection control. So there's lots and lots of people who, you know, the last time they saw the person who was going to die, they didn't know they were going to die. They didn't get a chance to say goodbye and they weren't able to see them afterwards. And I think there is, not to say everybody wants or needs to see the body after someone dies, but for those that do need that experience, it is a real need. I believe, and I feel like I see in my work, it's part of processing or understanding that this thing has happened at all. At Poppies, we did facilitate those visits. And, you know, we had families that came in 10, 12 times. And you can see the need, you know, when that's happening. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been a real challenging year and we've learned a lot. And I really hope that this experience kind of nationally has not only raised awareness about death and dying and grieving, but also shifted that idea that there are people who are grieving and then there's like all the other people. Because I think it's that loneliness. You know, that's one of the main reasons why I want this conversation to be more normal, is because it's not right that people who are going through that experience feel like they are alone when actually they're experiencing one of the defining realities of being a human being. You know, it's a rite of passage to grieve. It's not a nice one, but it is your humanity, you know, happening right there.
It is a fascinating discussion, and what's been really interesting so far is seeing the comments and the chat that's been going on between people, reaching out, sharing experiences as you've raised issues, the three of you, kind of supporting each other, sharing information. But it's just been really lovely to see, and I hope that reflects the community that we're all part of, which is not just the community of people who tend to work around these issues, but the community of being human and our humanity and how we interact with each other. So for me, COVID has shown some extraordinary and really humbling examples of the human spirit and how people can soar at the hardest and the most difficult of times. And I found that incredibly humbling to watch. Now, we could carry on with lots, but I've got some questions that are coming in. So I wondered if I could put this to panel. So this is a question from Lorraine. My concern is that if I was diagnosed with dementia, but physically I could live for many years. Now, given that assisted dying is against the law, what choices might I have that aren't going into a care home? And I wonder, any of you feel comfortable talking about that? I wonder, Isata, maybe you're perhaps able to help a little.
Well, I think within UK as a whole, people, there is quite a lot of noise about people being encouraged to express their preferred place of care and death. And I think within NHS England is trying very hard to support that with in collaboration with hospices, especially Hospice UK and all the local hospices within England. And part of our hospice, part of our cohort of patients actually, it's dementia patients. So our largest population in terms of cohort of patients is cancer-related diagnosis. And then the second largest is now dementia. And when someone is diagnosed with dementia, what we try and do from my hospice's perspective, we've now got specialist dementia palliative care nurses who start the conversation with you, wherein you express that you want to die at home. We try to make sure we put things in place that would ensure that is done as much as possible or as best as possible. Again, sometimes when it actually comes to the end, there are so many challenges that might not permit that to happen. But you do have a choice not to go into a care home. That's the bottom line. There is that choice not to go into the care home. And your local commissioning groups and other support networks would ensure that you have the services put in place so that if you want to die at home, you can die at home. Mm-hmm. You probably wasn't here when I had introduced myself, but part of my role is heading a community services team. So although I work for the hospice provides 3 different services. So we provide the inpatient service where people go for symptom control, end-of-life care, respite, and so on and so forth. But we also have the community services where people are being supported within their own homes or what they do call their homes. So yes, you can die at home, and there are services in place that are available that will ensure that that is met.
Definitely. And I would add to that as well to say, Lorraine, it's worth thinking about now. What do you want now?
Yes.
If this doesn't happen, it may never happen to you, I hope. But if it does, now is the time to be thinking about that. Write those wishes down, read about advanced care planning, find out a bit about what could be options for you. And I think that gives you a sense of feeling a little bit more empowered, because it can feel very overwhelming and daunting. And Isat is correct. Many of the hospices, this is their day-to-day. Dementia, unfortunately, is incredibly common, and so they'll be very used to working with people who have experienced dementia and their family and their relatives as well. So thank you for your question.
Absolutely. And just to add, if like Sarah said, it's about writing things down now. And if you don't know where to start, you could always go, there's documents such as This Is Me, that would give you that idea or information as to where to start and other documents such as preferred place of care or wishes. They're all available online, and you could download those, and it'll kind of prompt you to start thinking about what sort of questions you need to be answering or what to put down.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to Jane, who's asked us a question about just wondering how to hold and keep safe people who are perhaps vulnerable when they're having these conversations as non-professionals. I attended a forum, and although it was good to chat about death, dying and grief, I felt uncomfortable that perhaps there was one person in particular who was left in a worse space when they left. Is there anything that you would like to share, panel, on that? Any observations? Maybe Nafisa, sorry to pounce on you about this, but your own journey of grief, what's been helpful for you so far?
Well, just to jump straight to the question, actually, I have actually attended a few kind of virtual events during this time. I haven't yet witnessed someone that's been left worse off, but I think it's just important to remember there's a difference between professionals in this space versus community leaders. And I think as long as these individuals are pass over the relevant resources or contact details who you can get in touch with should you feel worse, then actually I don't think those kind of spaces are doing anything wrong, because they are holding space for these discussions, and a lot of people find it very helpful. It might have just been quite unfortunate that this person was made to feel worse. And for me, my grief, I guess, it is just very cathartic to be able to speak about it with no shame, and the fact that I am able to empower others, particularly my age group, and with it being framed within the lockdown and the pandemic, it's been nice to feel that to some extent, everyone is understanding of the collective grief we've experienced as society. And if you just times that by 100, then you have a kind of insight into the window of someone's grief when they lose a loved one. So that in a way has been a comfort. When I express a part of my grief, there's always an element of relatability to one of the feelings I'm experiencing. So that's been good.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Gosh, I'm kind of conscious that we're moving in through time, and there's a really interesting question from Prakash Patel saying, I think one of the greatest help during COVID was the digital ability to Zoom and live funerals, as we did for a friend whose family in the UK couldn't come and say goodbye in South Africa. That live stream made them feel that they were here. Poppy, have you had experiences of the live streaming and the videos?
Yeah, definitely. And interestingly, that there were crematoria and other funeral venues who were doing this before. They called it webcasting, but it was something that was used rarely, in certain circumstances. And it would be something as a funeral director that you'd hear about someone having family in Australia or whatever, and you'd say, do you know there's this service? And those services have definitely stepped up a gear. But it's great, and it's a brilliant way of bringing in people who couldn't be there, and I think it extends beyond the funeral, right? So, we read about hospices doing an amazing job, and hospitals doing an amazing job of using technology to connect people with people who are dying, in the absence of being able to be there physically close together. And similarly, we've done that at Poppy. So if there was a circumstance where someone couldn't come and spend time with the person who died, that's absolutely something that we can use too. So I think it's great. I mean, I feel like we do need each other physically, so and we know that, we know that hugging is kind of important, and physicality is important, and experiencing things physically together is important, to go through things together. But I think it's a great backup. It's a great way of extending inclusion, and I'm sure there are people in the funeral sector who've had to get on board with this, because it can be quite sort of traditional, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. I'm just thinking in terms of the kind of the theme for this evening. I wondered if each of you could tell me, what does it mean to you personally to be in a good place to die? Don't mind who goes first.
I'm happy to start.
Thank you, Poppy.
I mean, when I think about this question, for us all to be in a good place to die requires our society to accept that we're all going to die. Because the worst thing about the process, I think, is the loneliness and the kind of, we speak to people who are dying all the time, or to families where someone has died. And, you know, I understand it, but we still live in a society where that death feels like a shock and a failure, you know, and it's not to say you'll ever remove those feelings, but I think we would all be in a better place to die if we were surrounded by neighbours and community that recognise that this was part of life, and I think we'd feel less lonely. That's obviously a huge one, not something that's going to be solved overnight. I think more specifically, and I shared some of these thoughts for the blog we put out, I think for me it's about, there's a huge like peacemaking element about this for me. So trying to be at peace with myself, trying to be at peace with the people that I love. I love that thing Nafisa said earlier. I was really, really honoured to be on a panel with Nafisa's sister Saima a few years ago, and listening to her speak and watching her courage and openness facing what was coming. That reality that like we're not born with like 100-year contract on planet Earth, you know. I don't know where that started, but this idea that if we, you know, don't get to 100, we've been betrayed or like shortchanged. I think being in a good place to die is like coming to some acceptance that, you know, this is coming to all of us, and we're all in this together, I guess.
Thank you. I would agree.
Poppy, you just summed that up amazingly. I'd like to reiterate, a good place to die would be a place of understanding and acceptance that life isn't, you know, it's not guaranteed, and also to have I guess, an element of some form of spirituality, not to push it on anyone, because I'm not religious myself or anything. I just know that you're not limited to your body, and I think as soon as you feel that, as soon as you experience a loss, you feel that that's not it. And I would love to find a way to communicate that within our society, and I guess just having more and more people sharing their experiences of loss. Every story that's shared is so important, because even if you just connect with 2 people, 3 people, that will then instigate the normalization of death, and that person may then go on to have conversations with their family or friends, and it's just an amazing thing that can happen. So a good place to be is just normalizing the concepts of death, and it's going to happen. Let's prepare for it, but don't freak out either. Everyone needs to relax. We just have to feel it out ourselves.
Oh, what a lovely way to describe it. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to chill out and not be so worried about it. Thank you, Nafisa. Aisata, any thoughts from you about what does it mean to you personally to be in a good place to die? You've seen many people die, I'm sure, during your career.
Well, for me, it's about, again, making sure everyone that is around me is comfortable to talk about death and dying, and that it's inevitable, and it is, like Poppy said, it's a rite of passage. We need to talk about it. And personally, is for me to ensure that what I want and what I need when I die is put in place, and I have that reassurance that it will be acted upon. But most importantly for me, my good place will be the legacy I leave behind. I do a lot of humanitarian work, so just reflecting on that and knowing that I've made a difference in in somebody's life, for me, is a good place to die. And with my family around me, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And we've got one more question from the kind of audience I want to put to actually to Poppy, because it's very much specifically this question from JJ. She says, can people contact Poppies if they need help with planning for death or dealing with the consequences of death? A friend of theirs is a minister, and so they would really appreciate knowing, can they get in touch?
Yes. It's the short answer. And I just put our contact details in the chat. Yeah, we really love hearing from people as soon as they're willing to talk about it, basically, because the sooner we get to talk to people, we know, and I know the same will be true for ISATA, the more of a chance we have of getting it right for them, because the more time there is to get those conversations going. But of course, when we get a call at 1 a.m. saying the death has happened, that's great too. But as a funeral directors, we love to hear from people. We do behind the scenes tours of our mortuary, both not right now physically, but we will do them physically again. We have open days. We do the tours digitally. We love email us, call us. You know, we're so interested in opening this conversation up, as well as the practical work we're doing on the ground.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Poppy. I wonder, as we end nearing the time to finish, final remarks. Nafisa, for you, any final thoughts, and how can people get in touch? How can they kind of, support you and you support them and be part of this incredible community of care, I think?
Well, first of all, I would just like to express my gratitude again for this sector, particularly with my experiences with the hospice and the process of going through end of life and a funeral. And in terms of what I'm trying to achieve here, a continuation of my sister's work, but also navigating my journey of grief, my family's journey of grief. Putting on some events basically. So if you can signpost anyone to join these supper clubs or workshops, I'd really appreciate that. Some called Goodness Gracious Grief Online. I'm doing a bit of writing, so you can find my blog under the same name and on Instagram. And fingers crossed, I have an exhibition going ahead in September based in Shoreditch. And I basically will be exploring what grief can look like through a bit of an immersive experience. So it's in collaboration with another charity and a few of my peers, but hopefully just breaking down what grief can look like, both as a person experiencing it, but also a person that's supporting you through it too. And just honestly, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this important discussion. I'm really, just grateful, full of gratitude. Thank you.
I think, Nafisa, it's us that need to thank you, actually, given how soon or how close your sister's death is to you and your experience, that you are willing to come and share some of that this evening. I found hugely humbling and really inspiring. And I think if we've got, people like yourself trying to encourage the 20s and 30s to think about that, we're going to be in good hands as we move forward in the future.
Thank you.
Isata, what about you, your final thoughts? And how can people, what is it that you'd like to leave people with, your final key messaging?
Well, for me, it's first of all thanking Poppies. I think I've known Poppies since inception, really, isn't it? And we've worked very well together, and it's been amazing, it's been fascinating, and it's been a learning process. And one of the things Poppies has helped us to do as healthcare professionals, especially palliative care specialists, it's giving us the confidence to talk about beyond death, what happens after death. Because for us, when we have that conversation with someone, when we talk to someone about what the future holds and planning what they would like, what they want, where they want to be, how they want it, and so on and so forth. Time and time again now, we're having people say to us, So what happens next? You know, and Poppies has been able to open her doors to us, to give us that platform for us to learn more and understand what it's like within a funeral director's sector. What happens next? And so I just want to say thank you for that. What I want to leave with people is the fact that death and dying, it's a conversation that we should all be having, because I think one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that it's inevitable, and most times we don't know when it's coming. And therefore, it's very important to keep having the discussion, encouraging the discussion about death and dying, and also reminding people that it doesn't talking about death and dying, or what a good place would be like, does not preempt death. Absolutely. In actual fact, it gives you peace. It puts you at peace, and it puts your loved ones at peace. And a hospice's role is about supporting you to have some of those discussions and encourage you and ensure that you put plans in place that works for you and your family. But more importantly, it's about helping you live every moment. For our hospice, that is our mission. It's to ensure that you're not just focused on what the future holds. It's about how do you live every moment until when that death comes around. So for me, I would say keep talking about it, encourage others to talk about it. And I think the more we talk about it, the easier it gets.
Super. Thank you so much. Wise words. Poppy, we've got a couple of minutes literally before we have to finish. Any final thoughts?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is come and visit us at poppiesfunerals.co.uk. We've got a really brilliant blog that is called Talking Death. So you think you know what that blog's about. But it's fascinating and brilliant. Follow us on social media at Poppies Funerals. And then in terms of final thoughts, I just would say, can we all make a pact to be that person in the community that signposts that we're willing to talk about this? Because I think we all know, those of us who've had these conversations, it doesn't work to try and force people to have this discussion. But what we can signpost to our family, friends, neighbours, school, workplace, like, I'm up for this discussion. So if you ever want to talk about it, you could talk to me and you'll be welcome. Because I know as a funeral director, it's quite often that someone will call me and they're not calling me because they need me to be their funeral director. They're calling me because they're a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, and someone is dying and they feel alone and no one is willing to have the discussion, and they think I might be, and they're right. So if we can just keep lighting those beacons, then I think we will be creating a more welcoming world for us to be grieving in.
Thank you, Poppy. What a great way to finish our discussion this evening. I think all that remains is for me to say a huge thank you to Nafisa, Aisata and Poppy for their time and their amazing insights this evening. We really hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I think you have, from all the amazing discussions that I've seen going on in the chat. It's been particularly inspiring to hear you three amazing women help us to talk about this, break the stigma down, and sort of take this forward as we move on from this evening. Big thanks to Poppy for putting on the discussion, which has really, I think, contributed to our ability to talk about death, dying and grief, and indeed maybe help us break some more of those barriers down around the stigma that this issue seems to bring. So that's it from us this evening. We wish you well. Please don't forget that if you want extra support, there's been the information in the chat, so do reach out for that. And again, a huge thanks to our wonderful speakers this evening. It's been a real privilege and a lovely warm atmosphere. I feel like real care in this discussion this evening. So thank you to you speakers, and thank you to the audience. And we'll wish you good night.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.